What's up? For the record, today is the 1st of March, Thursday, 2018. So, a very, coincidental or relevant topic that has been on my mind a lot lately would coincide with Jupiter and Scorpio. Jupiter representing opinions, perspective, beliefs, dogma, or some of your values, more or less, or the way that you rationalize your values or things that are important to you. Scorpio obviously has a lot to do with the secrets of the self, the underbelly, or the actual rational psychological motives of oneself. And on a sociological or mundane perspective, it has to do with the economy, the market, plutocracy, and corporatism in general. This is also another relevant topic because not only have we been enduring the Pluto in Capricorn, which is the epitome of plutocracy, transit for almost over a decade now, but we now have Saturn in Capricorn as well. And so one thing that regardless of what side of the political spectrum you align with, the one thing that was kind of severed or, basically a stumbling block or sabotage or interfered with the president-elect getting elected, Trump, is that he opted not to take any donors or basically be financially backed by any of the lobbyists, which are the corporations that have particular agendas and motives, and you always follow the money to find the motives. In recent times, beyond my astrological interpretation and investigation, more or less, of the United States as an actual government or institution, and the correlating chart events that happened with the 1929 stock exchange crash, and with the current time, that led me to look more into things that are still an ongoing issue now that correlate with the 1960s, so the Uranus-Pluto conjunction as opposed to the Uranus-Pluto square comparison thing. And primarily when the Food and Drug Administration, the agriculture was federalized, or more or less there was an overreach of the actual government that's supposed to be the authorities that we trust to oversee any of the private sectors. That actually doesn't spell out disastrous, more or less. What it is when there seems to be some sort of alliances, treaties, agreeing, contractual kind of things that are behind the scenes with the government branches and the particular sectors, like I'm talking about, like the CDC and the FDA, and the free market. So, for example, this has been a prominent thing that I've been in discussions about with another organization that was just recently founded. That's called the Public Health and Coalition. More or less, it's the PHC. It's a nutritional nonprofit advocating alternatives to what is considered the standard Food and Drug Administration recommendations for diets. And there's apparently, throughout the 40s and 1950s, there was this huge push, and that was right around when the FDA got federalized, and that grains or carbs were essentially supposed to be the huge staple of the foods that you have in your diet. The rest of the world, since Jupiter and Virgos happened in 2015, have come to the realization that carbs are actually not a self-sustaining thing. They are not nutritionally sound, and they're actually, in excess, are very, very toxic for our people. The only country that hasn't jumped on that bandwagon is obviously the United States. And primarily, when you think back, even myself going cross-country on, tour buses and stuff, seeing the amass of cornfields. Corn is a grain, essentially, and it's also a carb. So when you allow alliances to become intertwined with the government oversight that's supposed to regulate things with the corporations, which are the lobbyists, that are just producing corn out up the wazoo, then basically the connections or the actual oversight that's supposed to regulate those things and tell people what's best for them begin to have biases and be tainted. That's putting it nicely. With the particular, corporations or companies or even agriculture giants that are trying to make profits. And therein lies the huge issue with why the free market, plutocracy, and what everybody's collectively on all sides of the spectrum are upset about the elites, the corporatism, the one percenters, and why there's a monopolization going on. It's not specifically because the free market is a failing system. It's because of these secret alliances that have been created. So hopefully we continue on finding ways by, cutting spending and regulations and trying to localize things more or less and pull back some of the overreach from a lot of these government institutions, because for years and years, regardless of nonprofit organizations or people bringing attention to this, or even, for example, Trump before he was into the political spectrum, him trying to invest in certain candidates that would actually fix some of the trade deals like he's trying to do right now, which will eventually put a wedge in a lot of these coalitions with the corporatism and the monopolization and the government's, overreach in their faculties and stuff like that. When we actually destroy that, there will be a change with that. And regardless if people realize it or not, the whole monopolization with the corporate entities and the government is the closest thing to democratic socialism that this country's ever came to in any of its founding or any of its, actual existence. So another thing that bothers me is they always say follow the money. In recent times when that mass shooting happened in Florida, specifically what's come out of the woodworks is that the local law enforcement knew fully well about this kid, but decided to not actually document that would go, to Homeland Security and all that there was some sort of continuous threat going on, because they wanted to make themselves look good so they can continue to get more federalized money and be recognized as a safe neighborhood. So they essentially, again, there was some sort of motive, primarily on a money end. And another thing I've noticed too, that was brought up on Minds, is that there's been substantial, I can't even remember the exact number, but substantial grants as well as fundraisers for the school and the county where the Sandy Hook shooting happened. And there are some parents, some of the surviving family members of the kids killed, that say that they still can't get counseling or any kind of assistance despite the fact that all that aid went there. They went through the normal, I can't remember the name of the actual organization, but it's just like the Red Cross and FEMA or something like that. United Way, there we go. United Way was the one that was supposed to distribute that money, and it still has yet to distribute all that money. There's still parents that are grieving, that wish they could have some help that they've been paying for counseling on their own dime. And they're still withholding funds for that. And they're delegating funds to other things as well. And primarily one thing that has come up over and over again, specifically like with one of those congressmen that's from Texas, that's a Democrat, it was recently revealed that she's actually has a nonprofit for low-income families that need food, school food lunches for kids in school, where she had some sort of organization, nonprofit for that. And it turns out she was rounding the actual donations to the nearest hundreds of dollars and actually pocketing it in a separate account for herself. This is nothing new when it comes to all these, nationally recognized or, federalized organizations that are supposed to help with charities. So it turns out, just like with all the other previous examples, follow the money, a lot of these tragedies kept being perpetuated, like school shootings, because it then gives money in funding for some sort of humanitarian or outreach thing for sympathy. while simultaneously encouraging the agenda to disarm American citizens. When it's proven that in all these shootings that all of these guns are usually obtained illegally, except for at this particular example in Florida, that child actually obtained that firearm legally because his parents allowed him to have it. But if the sheriff's office would have actually followed through with all the warnings, they would have been able to nip this in the bud. So yet again, it was the system again, basically failing everyone. And now they're pushing to do some, restriction regulations with gun rights, as well as now playing the victim to the public. So I'm sure that there will be substantial fundraisers and money distributed to the Parkland School District or whatever, primarily because of this. And think of this, even in my local area, I saw a sign up there today. I'm really good with psychology. It said, vote for your school in the election. My relative brought up to me that it's because they house more students than they're allowed to, and they want to redo the entrance to the school and update the actual stoves and the kitchenette stuff for the cafeteria for school lunches. Well, why would we donate money to that when they're going to continue to perpetuate grain prominent diets, which is actually toxic for the kids, and they're not actually going to secure the schools from what's going on because they benefit more from the deaths and the publicity of the fear than they do actually protecting the kids themselves. And that goes back down to the whole plutocracy, greed, and primarily actually what the Bible says about how as the progression of man goes on, and this is even in Greek mythology as well, the progression of man goes on, that there will be a overwhelming sociological trend of psychopathy, or aka people cutting each other's throats or stepping on each other's necks for the sake of profit and money. And the greed will be intangible. And that's exactly what's been going on. And I just felt like that's something that should definitely be touched on. And even another thing, as the Democrats are in Congress were actually proposing a bill, and it doesn't actually prohibit any gun control, because you can't be under the age of 21 with owning a semi-automatic firearm, like a handgun. You can get rifles without having a thorough background check and being under 21. You can be 18. But all of them are semi-automatic, essentially, unless you're getting like a revolver or something, or an old musket. And they want to basically make it so you have to be 21, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But then the NRA, which is the National Rifle Association, comes out and starts plastering everywhere that they're trying to pass gun legislation to basically ban the sale and distribution of semi-automatic weapons. And they specifically left out that it was only for people under the 21 years of age unless they're active duty military. And again, it's because every single time that there's a huge scare that there's going to be some sort of gun control, even the people who already own firearms in the United States legally, they go out and they decide, I'm going to go buy whichever one they're threatening to actually, ban. Or, like when they were talking about limiting magazines, people were going to gun shows, like, all over the country and buying them in mass quantities, the clips that they're contemplating on banning. So yet again, the NRA, which is supposed to just defend our Second Amendment, is utilizing the fear, yet again, to perpetuate and sell more rifles. And it's just disgusting all over the board. And that thoroughly needs to be eradicated from everything that is the United States in general. And I know that that's not going to happen, but then that means that we need to if people can't learn to control themselves and contain themselves, then we need to cut the connections and make it so the accessibility to manipulate the system and to abuse the different connections can no longer happen. Because clearly people cannot be left to their own devices and their own self-worth and integrity, if they even have any, and do what they should be doing. So it's not more regulations by the top authorities or the federalization. It's removing all that shit and letting people take care of themselves. Because obviously at this point or another, there's no emotional investment or actual, wholehearted, like, bleeding heart investment that people would have in anybody else but themselves at this point. And that's pretty much how society needs to carry itself again. So continuing on with the Jupiter and Scorpio themed and organizations manipulating the system, I'm skimming a group that's on minds.com. It's called Leaks and Whistleblowers. And I was just kind of looking for exact context because I have thoroughly seen multiple examples, great examples of organizations abusing their privilege and their connections. But I wanted to use specifics primarily for this podcast, and since the first duration of this is only 15 minutes long, and I've got 45 minutes per episode to kill, I thought I'd give some more thorough context for people who are kind of, feeling that like, well, that's a great opener, but let's talk about this a little bit more. So, someone posted, Twitter and all these monopolies need to be stripped down just like government at every level. So, another person echoing what I'm talking about. They're out of control, abusive, and a threat to national security and freedom. We the people have added tremendous value to these platforms, and now that we have made them rich and powerful by our content, they want to silence and enslave us. I have put my response into music. I'm not going to go play his music, but... Somebody else posts, NSA proof to actually funded by U.S. government agencies work for BBG, FBI, and the Department of Justice. Documentations. And what part of funding both sides don't they get? Secretly, Google as well. In the hands of our government are the tools used to spy on us. Let me see, what else? Here's the same individual who posted that today, just last week. Here's the deal. We the people have no trust left in the government agencies. Less trust for lamestream media or fake news. So here's what needs to happen in every tragic event from now on. No spokespeople from the event. Every eyewitness needs to be interviewed, and their testimony needs to be posted for the public to see and analyzed by everyone. This is the way that we can find common thread and consensus and get more realistic ideas of what happened. Yeah, that'll never happen, though. That's the beauty of me actually doing the astrological analysis charts, which, as this actual shooting broke out in Florida, and that's, I think, what they're referencing, I uploaded really quick a 10-minute synopsis as I was seeing the feeds on Twitter about this going on, and I confirmed a lot of what actually is now unfolding and coming out, that they were well aware of this on a local level, and that essentially this kid was out to kill classmates. There's been proof now that he's actually made direct threats to classmates before, and yeah, and things that were not known to the public before. I said exactly, and that's the beauty of me being a Plutonian, psychic astrologist, that I can actually depict a lot of those things, regardless if they've happened yet, regardless if the information has been leaked or not. And yeah, that's kind of primarily what I'm thinking maybe I should go in that direction with, is to debunk all the bullshit and lies going on. And I think that that's what a lot of what I'm going to do is going to spiral into. Really? I don't know if that's accurate or not, but some individual on here posts on YouTube, Democrats blame Russian bots for civil discord with Sheriff Israel in the Parkland shooting. Some of this stuff, to be frank, too, like, a lot of it, yeah, there's some truth to it, but some people just go a little bit off the deep end with this. And that's the thing that also bothers me, too. Like, I appreciate people who are willing to come out and, like, actually say what's going on. But they need to also understand, too, that their skepticism and their paranoia, sometimes it's on levels of paranoia, is, they step over the line of where their paranoia and skepticism are being objective. And yeah, that's the one thing that kind of irks me, because fascinatingly enough, as more corruption, secret, covert operations have been going on, the deep state has been seeming to get deeper and more intricate with everyday citizens' lives. It seems that some of the kooky stuff that's said on Fox News, even back, like 5 to 10 years ago, and how Alex Jones specifically has always been looked at as a fucking nutcase. But ironically enough, the more and more time has gone on, you actually get more accurate, objective perspectives of what's been going on in recent events from watching Fox News or Alex Jones, which is terrifying to me, than ever. There are certain points where I'll be listening or looking at an Alex Jones, a snippet or something, and I go, yep, I totally get you. I looked at the charts. Yep, you're totally right on that. And then he starts to go over the deep end and goes like, aliens. And I'm like, okay, there's where you lost it. And that's one thing that I'm fairly certain why my Facebook has been permanently disabled and why my rayreinhartz.blog was actually completely blacklisted and removed from Google search, because I'm giving a objective, accurate system that I'm using with looking at astrology charts to basically support what some of these quote-unquote paranoid conspiracy theorists think. And I remember I used to kind of just get hunches too, because I'm a bit skeptic and paranoid myself to some extent, and I've worked to curb that essentially with actual using astrology as an objective tool to be like, okay, I'm going to be a little kooky today, so be aware of that. And so I would go back and look for like double check multiple sources to prove what I'm finding or prove the kind of like train of thought I'm coming to make sure that I'm not going crazy. And if I can't find multiple credible sources that are consistent, then I just go, okay, so I'm nuts. So more of that needs to happen, or primarily we need someone who is criticizing not only the mainstream media, but the abusive government powers that be. And obviously Trump does that, and he's been doing a thorough job with that. But he also gets screened as well, which there's nothing we can really do about that. But I've come to terms and I've realized that there's other quote-unquote people that are not psychics, because again, a lot of psychics, rely too much on their empathic kind of instincts or intuition, which could, teeter on the line of hallucinations and schizophrenic, visions, sorts of things. So it's really hard to have a realistic perspective with that. That's just how that goes. But other astrologers, specifically, that know the craft and can consistently produce charts and interpret them, even some of them that have vaguely insinuated things that I've blatantly talked about and publicized, they're very hush-hush and quiet about it as well, primarily because it's a quote-unquote career killer for some people because of the guilds and the alliances and the secret, agreements with some of the astrological organizations trying to actually keep on the hush-hush and be quiet about it. I still think it's fascinating to this day that back in I think it was like the first 15, 20 years of the 1900s, there was a quote-unquote fortune teller in New York that was arrested for fraudulent fortune-telling, and she basically told, the courts and the judge that I can prove that what I do is an actual science. And it was on a documentary about Nostradamus, probably about almost 10 years ago now, and I still have the clip somewhere on my YouTube, I believe, where the fortune teller was given a random birth time, an event for someone that she didn't know. It happened to be the judge's son, and she specifically gave a distinct description of who they were, and that they'll likely die an early death by water. And he revealed that just the previous year or year before that they died in a drowning accident. So it was astrology back then was raised to a quote-unquote science by the law, but yet still to this day, in 2018, there's the majority of actual states still classify astrologists or astrologers as some sort of fraudulent fortune-telling and a Ponzi scheme. Despite the fact that it's been proven, despite the fact that Benjamin Franklin, who's one of the founders of the entire country, notice that there's not any monuments about him or anything distinct about him anyway. He's the one that created the Farmer's Almanac and specifically warned us in certain, private journal entries and stuff that we were going to deal with the same kind of shit they were dealing with when the country was founded now. And astrologically that can be proven. So again, astrology is another thing that's been completely buried and basically shunned or, labeled as kooky, crazy stuff. And as a matter of fact, it's been the closest thing that I could come to actually legitimizing a lot of quote-unquote conspiracy theorists' narratives and stuff. And I think that that's definitely something, again, that needs to be brought into the astrological, metaphysical, occult community and arts is perhaps we need like a private investigator or a criminal investigation sort of person that is an astrologist as well. And not just focus on cold case files, but legitimately talk about things that are ongoing, that are important, that are potentially sabotaging or other things conspiring to sabotage or destroy the collective good needs to be brought to light. And just because I can't find any of those like really quick memes about the status of like these different organizations and like charities and stuff that actually only give back a certain amount. I remember like Susan G. Komen for the like cancer cure and stuff like that. Like there's only a certain percentage of all the donations that actually goes to actual cancer research, et cetera, et cetera. It's like all over the board. There's abuse all over that. I'll do a more specific, I guess, episode on that in the future. But perhaps I'll just leave this at that for now. And as I was letting that play and record onto my podcast episode, just because I understand how people on 4chan or, the dark web or Anonymous specifically try to hide their identity when they're revealing things like this. And despite the fact that I'm very reluctant to do so, at some point or another there will be some sort of, I'll use some sort of pen name or alias of some kind that's completely distinct and separate from anything that I've previously used, that will likely carry on into any of the publications that I do in the future. And so anybody who's intrigued about that, just keep tabs on, or even just email me directly at rayreinharts@gmail.com. I'm thinking, or at least kind of trying to brainstorm how I could potentially start making a newsletter of some kind. So if you're interested, or anybody's interested in potentially being a subscriber to said newsletter, please feel free to either check out rayreinharts.blog and contact me there, or just email me again directly at rayreinharts@gmail.com. And yeah, to be continued.